So, why is HIV/AIDS such a problem? Why is it so important? Well, HIV/AIDS is transmitted through bodily fluids, and once a carrier has, so once someone has contracted the disease, then it can remain dormant for a significant period of time, and so you're not getting an awful lot of visible symptoms until the HIV turns into full-blown AIDS. Meanwhile, the HIV virus is going to be attacking the immune system of the host, and throughout that period it is transmissible. The levels in the blood will increase and decrease, but that person may be relatively asymptomatic, and therefore the likelihood of disease transmission is very high. If you've got a disease, for instance, such as Ebola, then these diseases tend to be, although much more threatening in appearance, they are often much less serious, or they're generally much less serious when considered as a potential danger for the global population, because their symptoms come on so quickly and they are so severe and incapacitating that the replication and spread of the virus is limited by its pathogenicity. And so with HIV/AIDS, the transmission of the virus, the one infected carrier can transmit it to a large number of new people before they start to develop serious symptoms. And so after the initial infection, there'll be some strong flu-like symptoms. There may be malaise and some high temperature. And so once, if the person doesn't receive a test over this time, then gradually these symptoms will abate and it will become more asymptomatic. And after the asymptomatic period, which can last for years, you then end up with the full-blown AIDS, and the symptoms are more symptoms of not the virus, the HIV virus itself, but of the acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, causing secondary infections in the host, in which they will start to display symptoms of anything from athlete's foot through to tuberculosis. And so these opportunist infections, which will start to colonize the patient, is the patient will start getting recurrent infections, and it'll be quite difficult to get rid of them using normal processes such as bed rest and sometimes antibiotics, because their immune system is not doing its part in fighting off these pathogens. And so once someone has got the disease, then they start to distribute these regular infections, and it's very often only at that point that they go in after these recurrent infections and they get diagnosed. So if you're wanting to deal with HIV/AIDS, then you need to be putting a lot of resources into trying to prevent people from making that initial infection. And these interventions very often have to be targeted at specific groups of the population in which HIV transmission is more likely. However, if we think about in the UK, the incidence of HIV transmission is higher in heterosexual partnerships than it is in homosexual partnerships now. And so the general approach for precaution with this is to wear a condom for intercourse, and to take the general precautions around bodily fluids. But this doesn't always occur, and so you end up with HIV transmission unknowingly between the people that have contracted it and their partners. In developing countries, you end up with some very unpleasant situations whereby if they are forming long-term relationships, then one partner, typically the male of the couple, who is economically active and moves away from the family dwelling, they will have sex with or be exposed to bodily fluids from an infected person, and then they bring that back into their family, and so they will then infect the mother of the children in that family, and that mother can then pass the HIV virus on to their children, either through the bodily fluids in the birth of the child or through their breast milk. Where this is where we're getting high levels of HIV in countries, we're seeing the worst levels in sub-Saharan Africa, and in we're seeing very high percentages of the population in certain areas which have contracted HIV. And where that's affected the parents, there hasn't been the availability of antiretrovirals to treat it, or the secondary medical care required to deal with the secondary infections. Then that can cause the parents to pass away. When both parents died, you then got AIDS orphans, and sometimes these orphans will also be infected with the disease. So if you're going to treat HIV AIDS, then you need to commit to treating the patient with antiretrovirals. But the problem is the virus never goes away. If you've got the antiretrovirals, then you have to keep them on the antiretrovirals with a regular regimen adapted periodically for the patient for the rest of their life. And the cost at present for treating a patient with antiretrovirals is between $12,000 and $15,000 per person per year of their life. So if you're using the antiretrovirals, they're now good enough to mean that the life expectancy of an infected person is roughly the same as that of a non-infected person, which is a world away from where we were even 20 years ago. But the sheer cost in treating that percentage of any large percentage of a population with antiretrovirals for the duration of their life is so phenomenal as to make this one of the biggest spending items for public health globally. And so that is why HIV AIDS represents such a significant threat to global public health.